Well, hello. Good afternoon to all. It's not that we really need a microphone for this session, but because of the online participation, we need to be communicating through the microphone so they can understand what we are saying. So I'm going to ask you if you have any question or when you're going to say something, please come forward to use the microphone. Our session today, Andragogy in Scouting, is intended to go a bit farther than we use to understand Andragogy today. The objectives of this session are very simple. First of all, we need to have approach. We need to have an approach of what, oh, this sounds like a church, that's great. What the principles of Andragogy are, then what the principles of the adult management systems in Scouting are and how they complement or match with the principles of Andragogy. This, of course, is something new we are presenting here at this forum. And by the end, the idea is to identify some trends, threats, and also challenges of Andragogy in Scouting, getting back to this previous. Today, we have Rafe Lucado. Rafe Lucado, he is a member of the Inter-American Scout Committee. And I am Ralph, also from the Inter-American Scout region, from the World Scout Bureau Inter-American Office. I'm working as Adults in Scouting Director. First part will be charge of Rafe.
Good afternoon. Adults started scouting. And adults made their way in the way we do scouting, because we're part of the scout method. Adults that promote but not interfere with the way that youth reaches the purposes of scouting. But when we talk about adults, sometimes we forget that adults are not kids. In the 40s and 30s, some of the training that was developed for adults included treating adults sometimes as if they were kids, forgetting that adults have an adult personality and different needs and are not kids. And then, little by little, we have developed the field of Andragogy. Most people know it by Knowles, who was the modern father of Andragogy. And we will see first some differences in the principles that guide learning by children or youth and learning by adults. With respect to the need to know, I don't have this right. Okay. With respect to the need to know, children don't really need to know how to apply learning to their lives. They go and learn because dad and mom sent them there. Maybe even to scouting, to school. They go there because maybe their friend is there with scouting or their cousin. But adults really need to know why they are there to learn, because they have their objectives in life. They need to consider what are the benefits of learning. What will they gain by learning in a given moment? With respect to the self-concept, children, they're viewed by teachers as dependent on them. They need to be given the knowledge. They need to be given the skills. But adults, they're responsible for what they learn. And they got to learn what's important for them in their job or in their life, they don't have time or interest in learning things that are not relevant. They need things that will help them out, that will work for them. With the role of experience, well, usually children, youth, we consider them as inexperienced, as if they have not yet had the opportunity to live certain things. So the experience that counts is that experience of the expert, the leader, the teacher, who knows and has the access to the knowledge. But when we're talking about adults, every adult has an experience, has knowledge that he brings with him to the learning setting. And so the role of experience changes. It can be powerful what you bring with yourself. You can know more than the teacher with respect to some things. And when we learn with adults, we take that very much into account. We don't believe that we know it all and that we're going to unload upon you our great knowledge or wisdom. With respect to the readiness to learn, well, children, youth, they have to rely on the teachers, on the experts, to tell them they're ready to learn something else or they need to go to the next level. Adults, we don't act that way. We're ready to learn, but we're ready to learn when we know we can apply to real life situations. It's not a thing of a grade or for passing. It's a thing of receiving something useful in our lives. Kids are worried about the grades, about the competition. Adults are worried about their own goals, and not losing time when they learn. The orientation to learning in children is learning about subjects, experiences that are structured with respect to a logic of subject matter content. So we learn about this, about nature, or about this. Adults don't want to learn about a subject matter. They want something that's task-oriented. If they want to do something about nature, they want different areas, points of views that can help them solve their problem. They're not interested in learning a lot about something. They're interested in being able to do something with that. And that means that they're not interested in being experts. They're interested in using what they learn, not being able to talk about it and show that they know. And finally, children and usually youth are externally motivated. They're motivated because they receive something for learning. We structure system. We give them a badge. We give them a grade. We give them a pat on the back. Good, that's a way to do it. Adults don't usually need that. Adults have their own intrinsic motivations to learn. So as we see, there is a difference between the ways and assumptions of learning for youth and children and the learning for adults that are oriented by different questions that have to do mainly with their life, their work, their family, reaching personal, group objectives. The need to know. Adults want to know why they need to learn something. They don't want to learn something because they have to learn it. They want to know why. They want to know if they really need that. They want to question themselves and the situations they're in and then say, is this valid? Is this really what I need? That is a real consideration of adult learning, the need. Do we have a need for what we're learning? Or is just empty knowledge we're receiving to see if someday we can use it? Adults want knowledge for being used. So the need to know is a first principle that is very important. The learner's self-concept. Adults have a concept of being independent, of having their own purposes in life, of their own responsibility. They want to be treated as an adult with respect. with a knowledgeable intervention where they can fill their doubts, environments where they are able to put out what they know and their positive aspects. They're not there only to receive like a bag, a bunch of knowledge or a bunch of things, like if they were an empty bag. They're there to increment, to grow as a person, and when they learn, their self-concept grows too. All of us grow when we learn, and that's part of the idea of adult learning. The experience of learners. Adults come with different experiences than youth. They've lived life. They've had to be independent and do things on their own. So, the richest source of knowledge is in adults themselves. To be able to go into their experience by simulations, by business games, by problem-solving activities, by case studies. That is a way of making them give what they have to the educational setting, to the process of their own training. And so that is very important. The role of an adult's experience is basic. Without it, we would be treating them as kids, giving them what we think they need, not what they really need. And we adults want to receive what we need, not what somebody else thinks we need. And that's why our experience has to be taken into account. In adult education, you have to survey experiences, know what people's background is, and then upon that you build whatever you're going to build as a knowledge, skills, or attitudes. Readiness to learn. Adults, they're ready to learn anything that can help them. When you have a problem in your job, what do you want to do? Learn a way to solve it. You go to your neighbor in the next desk, hey, how you solve that? How do you do that? What's the way? Why? Because we have needs because we want to apply what we know, we want to learn to solve problems, to solve situations. Kids sometimes learn things because it's going to be good for them in the future. Someday they will use it. Adults want to solve the problem they have now. Things in the future, okay, good, but now first, then maybe something about the future. And that's very important in this case. Motivation. Motivation is, very important. It's what detonates the process of learning. You learn because you want to learn as an adult. You don't learn because it's imposed on you. You learn because it increases your satisfaction in your job, in what you do, in your family, your community. Your self-esteem grows. But of course, we can block this. We can block this, and Knowles said you can block adult motivation. And by blocking the motivation, you deteriorate the learning process, and so the adult increasingly learns less, even if being exposed more to a learning environment. Even the more he's exposed, the less he learns, because a negative motivation starts to act. Reisman, some years later, after the first concepts of adult education and Andragogy went out, said, hey, Andragogy is not just about adults learning. It's about lifelong learning. It's about learning all through life. But wait, it's not just about learning all through life. It's about the width of that learning. It's about learning that is intentionally directed by ourselves because we choose, because others choose it for us. At work, they tell you, hey, you got to go and train. In scouting, hey, you got to train yourself. So that's intentional, but outside directed. But sometimes it's intentional but self-directed. I want to learn. I buy a book. I go and take something that's useful for me. But at the same, there's a type of learning that's not intentional. In French, we use French and English as the two main languages. It would be said, and I'm not good in French, learning en passant. Learning as you go through life. As you walk through, you learn. And that time of learning is learning when you travel, when you go and are in a place, you're learning. Not inside this room. When you're out there, you're learning. You're learning when you go outside the doors of this hotel and go through town. You're learning. And then there's accidental learning. Then suddenly you were crossing the street and a car almost hit you. And you learn that here you got to take the passageway for the crossing the street. That you can't do it that way because they drive fast. And so you learn by accident. And of course, okay, go back because I saw you frown your oh sorry, it's a little bit fuzzy, isn't it? So back. You learn as you go through life and have different experiences that are natural. Travel, going to your job, being in your community. You learn when you have something that accidentally occurs, something that happens, makes you learn, right? Things that you didn't ever think that were going to happen, but that they happened and taught you a lesson. Is that right? Yeah. And then you have an unintentional way that is woven into life's routine. You learn because you grow older. And growing older gives you more experience and more things. Somebody said, what a pity. Now that I know it all, I have to die. And that is true of life. Huh? When you really know it all, then it's the moment we got to leave. Because we acquire, it's woven in our life routine. And every time, every day that goes by, we learn something more. So, Andragogy, he says, then it's lifelong learning. Through life, in the length of it, and on the width of it, by the experiences we have every day throughout our life. Does that make sense? So we're not talking only about a classroom setting, about a training setting. We're talking about Andragogy in life itself. Adults learning in an intentional or unintentional way every single day throughout whatever they do. Governance. God, what does this have to do here? Talking about adults. Good governance facilitates implementation of adult learning. Educational policy that's transparent, logical, accountable, equitable, it helps what? It helps that adults feel considered, that adults feel that it's fair, that adults feel that what they're getting is worth their money or their effort, that they are investing in whatever they're doing. So governance is important. Representation by and participation of all stakeholders is indispensable in order to guarantee responsiveness to the needs of the learner, and especially to whom? To those that cannot say, help me out, those that are disadvantaged. So when we talk about learning, we talk about adults, we ought to talk about governance. Because without good governance, you would not get fair and just education opportunities for adults. This comes from the Competency 6 from Brazil, United Nations, starting to analyze this matter. Learning organizations. When we aspire to be a learning organization, then, and we have adults in that organization, then we have to have a learning organization that considers adults as adults. So Andragogy becomes an institutional matter, not just of a training room or a training session or of life itself. It becomes a consideration in the everyday policies, in the everyday treatment we give to adults in an organization. In scouting, we should think andragogically of adults we work with. Why? Because in that way, we can respond in a better way to their needs, to their experiences. And now we'll talk some about that with Ralph, talking about competencies you bring and you need, so forth. It implies the permanent learning process, self-directed, autonomous, achieving the learning process by integrating it in the social context of a function or position. So that's a learning organization, all within the scope of adult education or andragogy. I'm finishing, so it's going to be easy. Okay. Sometimes we talk about the pillars of learning. That is the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes, the interaction with other persons that we are with. That is society. And all of that within the scope of coaching and andragogy makes sense for organizations that have to work with adults and coach them and mentor them so that they can reach the goals that the organization has and that the adult has, so that you can reach both with satisfaction to the institution and to the individual. So in those senses, andragogy that can project itself through coaching, mentoring, considering knowledge, considering skills, considering attitudes, values, considering interaction with other persons can lead us to a knowledge organization, or an organization sometimes called that learns. Ralph? Yes, sir.
Good. So far, we have seen what the usual principles of andragogy are, and our approach now is how we can fix it into our organization. Because, of course, there are certain principles in andragogy, explained by Rafe, but, of course, our organization has certain particularities which have to be taken into consideration when we start working with adults. And this does not mean that since we have a Scout method, that we will apply the Scout method to adults, because the Scout method is not supposed to be applied to adults or in their way of learning. Scout method is there to work with the youth, with the children. That's the Scout method for. Scout method is not there to work with adults. So it's not that we say that when we are working with children, we put them into pastoral system, we have a framework, symbolic framework, and we work in nature and so on and so forth. So that's what we have to do with the adults in our training courses. What does it mean? That we have, of course, to find another approach to do training with the adults, to help them to learn, to help them to understand what we are doing here, so we can have, in fact, the best results in the interest of our organization and at the end of our movement. If we take under consideration that we have a mission statement, our mission statement says that we are here to contribute to the education of young people, of course, we have to recognize that there are many actors present who can and will contribute to this achievement of the mission. This means that we have to understand that there are different positions, and of course, if we have different positions, there also should be different trainings to get to that positions. This does mean that we do not have a one only way of working, teaching adults in our movement. We have to take under consideration what they are going to do, what their job is going to be, what their position is going to be, and of course, in that way, probably this will influence the way we are going to work with them. This scheme is something we already know. It's there since the 90s. This is what we call the life cycle of an adult in our organization, which usually has 3 different phases. The first part is everything related to the attraction of adults, their recruitment, how we find the best person for the job, how we can decide if he, she is there and what way we should start. Then we have a second phase related to the performance of the adult in the movement. Of course, it has a support of training and its service support, and also all the way it is working. And at some point, there is an assessment, an evaluation to see if we have to go deeper into training or if we need to strengthen our service support. And finally, the 3 R's usually known in the decisions for the future: retirement, renewal, reassignment, and of course, all related with the recognition. Why am I bringing up the life cycle, or why are we presenting the life cycle? Because in our organization, we have to understand that, first of all, the life cycle of an adult is not the moment when he gets into our organization and maybe after 10, 15, 20 years, or 3 years, it depends, he is leaving. This is not the life cycle. The life cycle is for a certain position, for a certain job he's doing, and according to a certain period of time. This, of course, involves a whole concept about that we are not only doing training in our organization, we are not only interested that the adult learns, we are talking about a whole management system or a whole management with the adult to achieve the goals in our organization, where some part, of course, is training. But training itself is not only sitting in a classroom or having specific activities to learn how to perform a certain job. It has to do with all the support. It has to do with all the way I'm having been selected to do a job, and how, of course, I'm getting follow-up, ongoing support, and the whole part that makes me going on. This is one of the principles that we have to take into consideration when we are going to face andragogy in our organization. And second, the life cycle, as said, is specific to a certain position. But in our organization, many times, it is usual that we have many positions. I'm being, for example, let's say at national level, Adults and Scouting Director. But I'm also, let's say, for example, an assistant troop leader. So I have 2 different positions. And maybe I also have a 3rd position and I work something at a district level. So I have 3 positions. This means that I have 3 different life cycles, 3 different trainings, 3 different in-service supports, 3 different follow-ups and assessments. This, of course, is very, 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 I think, unique to our organization. If you get into a normal company, when you, let's say in your work time, you usually get into a company just for one job. You are hired to perform one job. So I can say my life cycle in that company would be just related to that job, and indeed, starting in the moment I'm getting into the company and finishing at the moment when I'm leaving the company, when I get fired or I retire or whatever. But in our organization, this is not the way it happens, because of what I said, it is more related to the job, to the position I'm having, and that I can have different positions and even in different life cycles. I can have one life cycle in a certain position, let's say again as the assistant troop leader. At this part where I'm being in the ongoing support, but at some moment someone approaches me and reaches out to me and says, aren't you interested to help us at the district level? We need you to do this job. So at that point, I would be, for example, for the district level, at the recruitment part. So we have different moments, different stages, and this, of course, will influence all the performance. Because, and now, that's the second part, or the third part maybe, there jumps in another aspect, which is also not new in our organization, but we have not, in many cases, developed the concept enough to work with it. And it's related to the competency approach. This means that I have certain knowledge, skills, abilities, which I bring with me, as Rafe already said. But within the organization, I develop others to perform a certain job, which also can lead in the future to be developing another job. So, this together leads us to think that it's not only just about to say, okay, it's the way how adults learn that we are supposed to be concerned in our organization. It's also related to the moment when he's learning. And now let's see again other different stages. For example, we are in a learning organization and we are talking about that we have an approach of competencies. Competencies, I can develop them by different means, not only within the movement. And we can use, therefore, a different example. For it, when I was a scout, I learned all the knots I had to know to make constructions and buildings and whatever using the scout handbook. And of course, my troop leader also taught me how to do them. Now, it's quite easy to find a scout or someone learning how to tie knots using YouTube. This does mean that the knowledge itself is still there, but the means have changed. This also does mean that it's not required that some specific person is there to teach me how to tie the knots. It means that if this person is there and can help me, that's fine. But we have to understand and we have to realize that I can also get the knowledge from somewhere else, even within our organization. Now we're talking about that we have a learning organization. What does a learning organization in this context mean? That in all levels, even if they are not intended to do so, I receive information, I receive knowledge, and I learn. And as an organization, I, at a certain point, have to recognize that even though if this knowledge is not provided by a specific scheme, by the person who is authorized to certificate that knowledge, I have it, because this is related to the development of my competencies. And that can happen, as said, in all stages of organization at all levels. Okay, these were just a few examples to introduce what we call the principles of the adults in scouting management systems. Just a few ideas. As said, this is not official literature, if we can say it in some way. These are ideas. Of course, we have developed them in our region, but hopefully we can, at some point, get to the part that they are very common in many places. First of all, we have to talk about coherence. Coherence is that what we are teaching in our, or not teaching, what we are developing in our management systems is coherent with other policies, with other ways of doing things. And of course, it's strongly related. It's not only adults in scouting, for example, it's adults in scouting program, organizational development, and everything has to be coherent to get the best out of it. The competency approach, which I already mentioned, to develop knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values required to perform a certain position, job, function. It also speaks about the learning organization I already referred to, where we recognize that in the day-to-day interaction we are learning, and this should be recognized, where we have to understand that even within the organization there are have to be offered learning opportunities, the most closer to the adults to get the best out of it, so that favors decision making to the nearest levels of the adult who is in the way of learning. This also means that we have to have a system which is accessible and also flexible, so the adult can get into the system at different stages. Not necessarily he has to go step by step. He just gets in where he really needs it and starts learning from then on. Which of course changes the way of thinking of a system that is a unique line. It opens up with many branches to develop different ways of learning. It means also that the system itself has to have horizontal relationships between trainers and trainees, to say it in some way, that we are equals, that I'm not above you, that I'm not hiding information of you, that we are really sharing it, and that we are in the same level, that we can discuss it. That the difference between you and me is maybe more about some knowledge or experience, but we are at the same level as adults and respect us in that way and have and gain the same feedback in that way. Transparency, of course, is a strong factor. As an adult, I have to know what's happening. It must be clear for me why certain decisions are made, why I'm being certificated, why not, why I have to attend this or that section. Of course, since we are speaking about competency approach and the specific job and all the environment in which I'm moving, it has to be personalized. It's there for me, it takes into account what I know, and so I can foresee a personal training plan just for me, where I can find the best way to get the training I need. The management system itself should also consider the youth insertion, but this is more related to the way we are developing certain positions. The management system should also consider that, of course, the learning should be meaningful. Brave already talked about it. that it's supposed to be there, not in an abstract term, let's say, some example. No, we have it there because we're going to use it. It has to be, it has to consider involvement, joint decision making, agree on specific tasks and work on them. It has to consider, of course, gender equality and the quality itself of the system. All these principles are related to what we think, propose as the adult in scouting management system. And this is strongly related to the andragogy, because all this will generate, in fact, the environment in which our adults in our organization are supposed to be trained, I don't know, more how they are getting developing the required competencies to be developed to perform certain positions or functions within our organization. This leads us to this scheme, to be considered as the adults in scouting management system as a whole, as we already presented it. We have the principles we've already spoken about. We have a strong interest, of course, to the retention. This is not a topic of this session itself, but it is a strong interest of organization to start working very hard on the retention part. We have the decisions for the future involved in all the life cycle. We have structures, we have regulations, we have procedures, how we run the whole system. But of course, we also have mainly 3 different areas: adults in scouting, youth program, organizational development, which give us certain positions and which will lead to a training scheme, maybe applied to me, together with a personal training plan. We have follow-up and payment, and the main figure within the whole system, which is the personal training advisor. The personal training advisor is something that is more maybe a mentor, it can be a coach, someone very close to me, who at the end is the responsible together with me to agree on if I have developed the competencies that are required, and what other training opportunities I need to continue developing the competencies I really need to develop for certain positions and for certain functions or jobs. Of course, we were speaking about the transparency, we were speaking about the personalization, we were speaking about the relevance in another field in the andragogy, just getting back to the 6 principles already presented by Rafe. This implies that we have to have a certain way of evaluating, which should be done. We think the best way would be the 360 degrees evaluating system, but of course there can be other ways of doing it. But this would be at the end maybe the way of understanding, of seeing how we can combine andragogy itself as a concept together with what we expect to happen in our organization like ours. Before we go on, because the next step will be more related with you, questions, ideas, suggestions? I know that there is a question coming from the online, from the online page, which I will lead to Ray Flucado because it's more related to what he explained. But from the floor are the questions here, comments? Yes? May you step please forward and stand here, hopefully by the green cross. This is the area which is beamed out.
Get shot. I think for adult education that we are using in the methodology that we use in the wood batch training, the concept, I think the concept is to instruct all the adults at the beginning of the courses to imagine yourself as a scout. Does this method is in kind of in conflict with the principle of the differences between the youth and adult? And of course, I'm talking about what happened in Taiwan. Okay, the way the courses is delivered is to treat everybody like a scout or like a Cub Scout during the courses. So if that works, does that apply to the so-called adult training, or if not, what are we missing? That would be my question.
Okay. Adults should be treated as adults. Simulations are a way of learning. You can simulate to be a youth doing something that specifically leads us to learn about the experience. But we should not be treated as kids or as youth, because we're adults. And as a simulation, as a way of learning, with a concrete scope and time limit, it's okay. But treating an adult as if he was a kid throughout a course would not be very andragogical. It would be kind of saying, you don't matter, you have no opinion in this. You're a kid because you're the trainee. And I am the trainer, the one who knows, and the one that's going to say what's going to happen here and what's good for you. Wouldn't be very andragogical at all. But of course, we can simulate. Simulations are a valid way of learning, but within a scope of time and content. Does that answer one part of the question? What? You had another part of the question?
I think that the other part is my observation during the wood batch courses. It will be the core training education system in the scouting for the adult, especially for the adult who was not a scout when they were younger. And the way I observe is a lot of adults, they enjoy to behave like a child. They feel that they have the opportunity during the course that they kind of go back to their childhood, the feeling, and the feeling motivate them to get into the scout activity, and that for me is that, yeah, of course, for some of simulation is one of the purpose, and then we should have another interaction like adult.
Okay, I think the most important principle is respect to the dignity of the adult, where he is the same as the trainer. Mm-hmm. He is no different than the trainer. He brings whole experience with him. In any case, if he can be a kid, the trainer should also be a kid. And well, that would solve it in that way, but we don't want to infantilize what we do. We want to treat things and analyze them as adults. If you take the role of a youth or a kid, then you take the whole role. You start thinking as a kid. You don't analyze it in a logical way, because kids start logic when they're 12 years old. Formal logic period starts at 12. And if you're playing as a Cub Scout in a Cub Scout course, what would we expect? Do you not be logical about what you're doing because you're playing to be a kid? I don't think that's the purpose of training. The purpose of training is to dignify the adult, to teach him the methods to work with children or adolescents, and to do it with an analytical point of view of the adult. If he has to go and do things that kids do, he has to go and do them. But then he returns to his adult role and analyzes as an adult and puts that into perspective. Then he learns because he's adding his experience, he's adding his opinion, the logical consequences of the activity, then that's good. But to play as a children or as a youth instead of taking our adult roles is not very andragogical. What it will lead is to lose adults on the long run because it becomes a pecking order where trainers know more and control more than trainees. And that is not the purpose of an andragogical system.
Is there another question from the floor? Online, we were asked to analyze this following question. If we accept that the scouting as a training starts in childhood, at which step or level or position can adult volunteers start their scouting life?
Well, Ralph, I think the World Adult in Scouting Policy talks very clearly about adults, young adults that are in the transition to become leaders in our movement, empowering themselves in that period of late adolescence, and that is that's a reality in scouting. And I think that it's a personal, individual situation because maturity is not sometimes by age. It depends on other factors. So sometimes an 18-year-old can take an adult role perfectly. Sometimes he needs more time to settle in to his new adult life. And as I was talking with Ralph, it all depends also in that last stage of being the subject of our program. If you start looking at your future life with a long scope, where you start planning what you're going to do when you become an adult, then maybe you're ready at some moment. But if adultness comes in suddenly, like a train hitting you where you're crossing the train line, then it's very hard. So, my friend out there in the virtual media, I think that it's a personal matter. What we should consider is that we should give opportunities to youth to be able to become as young adults, leaders in our scout organization.
Yes, if I may complement maybe the question. Of course, some consideration is about when I can start being treated as an adult, even in my association or my organization. Since we're talking about adults, and the question is, that I've lost the question. That if I have received training of scouting, being a scout, more or less, that's the idea behind the question. I can understand the question in the following way. If it is possible to be even treated an adult volunteers, maybe in a younger stage, not being an adult yet, or not having received all the training, given that I already have received some training. Maybe I would like to add here, of course, there are certain specific regulations about responsibility which are associated to the position of function. It's not all about just only going out to camping or whatever. I have, as an adult, I have responsibilities, and those are related strongly to the laws and the regulations in my country, which allowed me and say at what age I am being a citizen who can respond for certain ways of behaving and whatever, according to the law. But I would also like to add there that Scouting itself is not a school to train adult leaders. Scouting is a way of contributing to the education of young people to become good citizens, and maybe some of them, as a personal option, stay there or will come back as adult leaders. We are not interested in creating a system which is always there trying to create more and more and more adult scout leaders. It's there to, that if they come back and they stay there and they want to be there, it's okay, it's fine. But we must recognize that we are really interested in having adults, even coming from the outside, not having any idea about what scouting is, so our system can help them to understand and to perform certain positions. We are not interested that those who started Cub Scouts hopefully will be scout leaders until the end of their lives. We are interested that once they are leaving the movement at the age of 18 or 21 or whatever the age in your organization may be, they are good citizens. And if they want to come back, be adult leaders, of course, that's fine, that's nice, but it's not our purpose. And it also has to be clear that what we do in the first stage, when we work with the young people, when we apply the Scout method to contribute to the education of them, it is one intention, and the other, totally different, is the adult training to become, in one case, adult leaders within the movement, but also to become or to perform in certain positions which even may not include scouting skills. We have to consider that we have three areas, and one of them, for example, is institutional development. It has to do with communications, it has to do with finance, it has to do with management, and they certainly do not need to know how to camp or how to light a fire to make finance. So that's also an important key factor to be kept in mind when we think about when we can start being adults or receiving our training in our organization. I hope that this more or less has given an answer to the question. I don't know if someone from the floor wants to contribute or even make another point about this. Are we okay with it? Okay. So, Rafe, I would like to invite you here so you can introduce the next task.
So now we would like to address your experience about this. You got to be andragogical if we work with you and we say that we've got to consider adults and what they think and the experience you have. We want your experience now. We would like you to identify trends, threats, and challenges that have to do with andragogy as we've treated it in scouting. What should be the trend of scouting with respect to andragogy? Should we go more into it, more respect to the adult, more consideration, etc.? Should we not? Should we find that there are threats to applying andragogy in the scout movement? Are there things or issues that limit its application? What are the challenges to applying andragogy in the scout movement? These are the questions that we would like to identify. As we are a small group, we would do it group-wise. Get together in a group and try to answer this number 3. Identify trends, identify threats, and identify the challenges that we will have in applying Andragogy to the Scout movement. Good, so we'll do some group work. We can do it in the middle, and I think we can do a kind of a donut there and get together and work in this for some. Yeah. One group, just one group right in the middle, yeah. Yeah. So we can see it in front of the camera. Go ahead. It's all yours. You need the microphones.
What I just say is pretty much about the challenge in my country, about the delivery of the wood badge is part of the adult training, adult education, that there are some differences, actually. So probably some of you like to share in your country or your observation. Kapila, any comment or any sharing?
Yeah, so what I think is the most important thing to do to identify right person. So we are having a mechanism for the decades long mechanism, but in this moment we would think about that it still works or it need some sort of upgrade.
I talk about to the experience in my country, Honduras, in Central America, and the last time in the course, for example, we the adult in some course we believe the child and take the task only for the child. For example, in the camping, we maybe can you help me for translate, please? Because this right now.
In Honduras, since many years ago, we treated the adults in the training processes as children. And at the end, it didn't give the results to get them learning, because they focus themselves in the activities as children and not in the training process itself.
And right now we shed that. We have the more, especially for the training in the adult. You are adult. You are don't child. It's adult.
It's important to place the adult in the place of adult in training.
Yeah.
Because it's in the problem today. The problem for me is to say that when we are adults, when you say that, when we are adults, you are knowledge, and the knowledge are around you with internet, with a lot of sort of elements.
Yeah. That knowledge should be respected.
And for the trainers, the knowledge are not so important. That is important is the system, is the method to learn, but not the knowledge. And for me, it's important to make a best places for the adults in our training systems. You choose what you would like to learn, and in front of your parcours, your life cycle in the associations.
the Philippines, the trend there is most, if not all, Scout adults are school-based. So most of us there are teachers, be it in the government or private sector or private school teachers. It's kind of an organized training because for these teachers who may want to join the scouting movement, the scout organization gives us the basic training course right away. And we may say that almost all, if not all, almost all, if or majority, if not all, really have this basic training course serving as adult scouts. Although we have some volunteers for that, but the majority of the scout adult are professional teachers. I guess the challenge for us is to continue the higher training. We mentioned the wood badge. Simply because of the time constraints, especially that we are teachers, especially in the private sector. So, wood badge would take normally more than 7 days. So that means you're going to leave your regular work, which is your bread and butter, for that purpose. But somehow we do something about it because the scouting organization there invites us to do it during summer, which is our vacation. But just the same, that is also very challenging, although many can also attend that one. But there are a lot of factors, even if they have finished with the basic training course, advancing to the wood badge is really a kind of challenge. One factor is time. They will be away with the family. And another factor could be money, financial. Good if you are in the private sector and the school is very supportive, fine. But in the government, sometimes they have to ask also for some sponsorship. So it could be one. And I guess there is also kind of a threat, especially if you are to take the wood badge. We learned from the discussion a while ago that we really need to be treated as adult. But seemingly, sometimes in the training, there are some cases wherein this adult may not be treated as adult, maybe treated as maybe lack of respect in terms of the training per se. Maybe the training that is being done in the Kid Scouts, the same training also being done in adult. I guess that could be taken into consideration because, for example, if you'll begin to ask to jog for 1 or 2 kilometers, you have to take into consideration that this adult, sometimes 30s to 40s or 50s, they may not be doing the same that like those kids ranging from, shall we say, 13 to 18 years old. Okay, but in fairness, our scouting movement there, and of course the adult volunteers, particularly teachers, both in public and private, are very enthusiastic also to join the scouting movement for the kids. Thank you.
Well, I think also that it is very important to make a difference between children and adults because the adults have the responsibility of the children. So if you treat them like children, they also behave like children, and that would be very good to be a leader. I think a big challenge is also the participation because we're always talking about participation of our young people, but I think also in the training of the adults it is important if you can't measure learning or knowledge, but if you want to know if if the things you have told them they reach the things you have told them, it is important that they can participate, so that you give them a base to talk, to reflect the things they have learned. I think that is very important, and that is a big challenge, because often trainings look like just give input but do not have a feedback, or you don't give them room to reflect what they have learned.
You can even start before the training and ask them what do you want to learn also, not only the participation by reflection afterwards, but also at the start of the training.
There is some challenge that we are facing right now in Taiwan. One of the challenges is to provide a wider range of learning courses other than just the traditional wood badge. Like, we have the scout leader or scouters at the 40 and 50s, and they are not very comfortable with a lot of the technology, especially on the internet, etc. And the kids, they are very internet oriented, and that creates a demand that we should prepare some of the courses for those adults to catch up with the kids. There's a different thinking. And on the, you just think in the participation, actually on the reflection, overall, we consider it as a communication skill that we try to implement a new methodology in the training courses to get everybody involved during the courses. And specifically, that I organize the training courses, but we design especially for enough time to share, to discuss, and get involved and speak up. And usually in the traditional wood badge courses, maybe 30 minutes for some exchange of idea, expressing. I put 3 hours for grouping and exchange, different issue, different topic, rotating, and then everybody come back together and to share the it's like stimulating to heat it up. And by doing this, they can bring this experience, this methodology back to their troops. Now, this is a new challenge we try to bring in some new idea, new practice into among the adults, especially among the adults. In this way, we try to bring up their expertise, their experience, their knowledge into the group. Instead of just learning from the trainers, what Better Paul said 100 years ago. Yeah, it's important. It's the basics. But what more important is what will we do next? I think it's more important to the youth. Any other comments?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We just would like to ask you to fill out the form. Thank you very much for having joined us in this very familiar environment. Thanks also to our online community leaders who helped us with the online session, and of course also thank you very much to our rapporteur she is helping us with the outcomes of this session, and which certainly will help us to give recommendations for future developments. So thank you very much for your time. Enjoy yourself, and we will meet again.